5 minutes ago, the majestic marble halls of Buckingham Palace filled with the distinct clicks of countless cameras, creating an atmosphere of solemnity and tension. It was in this almost palpable silence that His Royal Highness Prince William uttered words destined to forever redefine the future of Her Majesty Queen Camilla. His voice, firm yet tinged with noticeable strain, echoed through the east wing of the palace as he made an announcement no one closely observing the royal family expected to hear. Her Majesty the Queen Consort is immediately stepping back from public duties. In those brief seconds, history seemed to shift its course. The statement, previously whispered only in private corridors, now gained official status. The Queen, who had only recently been at the very heart of the crown's daily rhythm, was now to recede into the shadows. This momentous announcement came in the dim morning light. Behind Prince William, the royal crest softly glinted in the camera flashes. His tone was markedly formal, yet his eyes betrayed something far deeper: the weight of inner conflict and the burden of duty. Sources close to the prince claim it was one of the most challenging public addresses of his life. The difficulty lay not in its political underpinnings, but in its deeply personal nature. At Kensington Palace, Her Royal Highness Catherine watched the broadcast in complete silence, gently pressing her hand to the screen as her husband spoke. In Windsor, Queen Camilla received the news surrounded by her aides. Yet, according to a palace insider, she uttered not a word, only lowering her gaze. And in his private chambers at Buckingham Palace, His Majesty King Charles remained in seclusion, reportedly giving his silent blessing to a decision that would forever alter the equilibrium of the British monarchy. Outside the palace gates, crowds had already begun to gather. Some carried bouquets of flowers, others photographs from the coronation, but no one could quite discern if this was a moment of sorrow or one of renewal. For today's announcement was not merely about royal titles. It touched upon fundamental questions of power, legacy, and the delicate, elusive line between duty and personal affection. To fully comprehend the shock of today's announcement, one must look back and see how tension had subtly mounted within the palace walls long before it spilled into public view. The seeds of this moment were sown many months ago, not in a single dispute, but in a slow, deliberate erosion of trust. Buckingham Palace, with its glittering chandeliers and endless corridors, had always masterfully disguised its internal fissures. Those who work inside say they sense the impending shifts. In early 2025, the number of engagements once spearheaded by Queen Camilla steadily diminished. Invitations to significant events, where she had once proudly stood beside the king, began to arrive with her name printed in smaller font or absent entirely. At first, it was very subtle, wrapped in the formal language of scheduling adjustments and health considerations, but the message was unmistakable and clear. Prince William began to fill the spaces Camilla once occupied. Initially, it seemed like a natural transition, an heir supporting his ailing father. But insiders now assert it was far more than that. It was part of what staff quietly began to refer to as the succession plan. An unspoken yet meticulously orchestrated preparation for a monarchy that would soon need a new rhythm and dynamic. Kensington Palace, William and Catherine's residence, became the nerve center of this intricate transition. Advisors met under the guise of modernization initiatives, but discussions ran far deeper. They concerned accountability, transparency, and the very survival of the monarchy in an era that no longer automatically defers to tradition. Prince William's philosophy was unequivocally clear. We serve by being visible, not concealed. It was a statement that would have thrilled Princess Diana, but it deeply unsettled Camilla. She had spent decades carving out a place for herself within a system that had once rejected her. To now watch this hard-won position quietly eroding under the banner of reform was unbearable. Sources close to her described late-night phone calls to trusted friends, where she complained, "They believe the monarchy can be run on goodwill alone. They forget that grace without structure is chaos." Meanwhile, King Charles, already weakened by ongoing treatment, sought to play the peacemaker. He insisted the family maintain dignity above all else. But dignity is a fragile thing when legacy is at stake. Behind closed doors, it became abundantly clear that the future of the monarchy was not merely a question of succession. It was a matter of identity. Princess Anne, ever stoic, observed the unfolding events, but chose to act as a bridge. "This wave cannot be stopped," she reportedly told Camilla during a private lunch at Windsor. "The question is whether you will ride it or be swept away by it." Camilla, however, was not one to quietly retreat. She tightened her grip on her remaining duties: charity galas, hospital visits, literary events, and insisted on presenting herself with unwavering royal composure. The press took note. In early September 2025, The Telegraph published an article, dubbing her a fixed point in a moving monarchy. What the article failed to mention was that within the palace walls, even her allies had begun to distance themselves. And so, the stage was set. A prince resolute on modernization, a queen unwilling to fade into the shadows, and a king torn between them both. What the public perceived as harmony, polite smiles on balcony appearances, perfectly staged photographs, was, in essence, the calm before a storm that had been brewing for decades. This was not merely the story of a retreating queen. It was the story of a monarchy looking at its own reflection, realizing that to survive, it might have to relinquish the very traditions that had built and shaped it. The first genuine sign of the impending shift, oddly enough, manifested not in an official communiqué, but in a subtle alteration to the tone of Camilla's smile. It happened at a charity gala in Windsor in late August, an event of the very glittering format she typically orchestrated with virtuosity. Camera flashes sparkled, the orchestra played melodies, yet for the first time, the queen consort appeared more a guest than the mistress of her own celebration. The observant attendees did not fail to notice. William and Catherine arrived together, radiating an unruffled calm, their body language conveying both restraint and purpose. Camilla, while gracious, seemed detached, glancing too often at her notes, clutching her glass too tightly. When she rose to deliver her speech, she stumbled on a phrase expressing gratitude to the future of the monarchy, pausing just long enough for a ripple of whispers to sweep through the hall. Video of the moment went viral on social media within hours. "Did you see her face?" one comment read. "She knows something we don't." The tabloids, ever hungry for sensation, began their hunt. The Daily Express ran with the headline, "Queen Camilla under pressure as palace shifts focus to William and Catherine." Inside Buckingham Palace, quiet whispers morphed into overt concern. Meetings were postponed, schedules shifted. Camilla requested a private audience with the king, seeking to clarify her role. Aides, however, claimed Charles postponed the meeting twice, citing fatigue. Truth be told, he was avoiding a confrontation whose outcome he foresaw as unfavorable. Meanwhile, William began fielding calls previously intended for his father. He coordinated with the Prime Minister's office, managed Commonwealth briefings, and represented the Crown at several key state events. The transition had already begun, but it was unfolding unofficially, in complete silence. One senior advisor put it bluntly. Buckingham was effectively running two courts, the old guard centered around Camilla, and the new one forming around William. Camilla, acutely aware of the shifting tides, began reaching out to longtime supporters, family, friends, charity partners, even select journalists, trying to gauge how much influence she still wielded. But the responses were cautious, polite, detached. No one wished to be on the wrong side of history. At Kensington Palace, Catherine sensed the approaching storm. Always careful in her diplomacy, she fully understood what was at stake. "It's not about power," she reportedly told a confidant. "It's about survival for all of us." Then came the moment that changed everything. A dinner at Windsor. It was meant to be a quiet family gathering. Charles, Camilla, William, Anne, and Catherine were present. The king looked frail, yet cheerful. Conversation began with polite pleasantries about garden renovations and state dinners. But halfway through, when Anne mentioned William's growing workload, Camilla interjected. "He's doing too much," she snapped. "And some of it isn't his place." William looked up, calm but firm. "Someone has to," he said. The ensuing silence was glacial. Even Charles remained silent. Camilla tried to make light of it. "Oh, I didn't mean it like that." But the damage was done. This dinner became a legend within the palace. Staff would later refer to it as the Windsor moment, the day the family's fissures became public within their own walls. From that moment, events accelerated. Camilla began canceling public engagements. William began holding more private meetings with senior advisors and assumed the role of a quiet intermediary. But even she could see it was no longer about equilibrium. It was about inevitability. Then, just 2 weeks before the official announcement, a palace insider leaked a confidential memo titled, "The Future Role of the Queen Consort." It was brief, stark, and devastating. In light of His Majesty's ongoing treatment and the evolving needs of the Crown, adjustments to representational duties may be required to maintain continuity and stability. In a single sentence, Camilla's public career was reduced to a contingency plan. Nevertheless, displaying true royal dignity, the Queen Consort never allowed herself to air public grievances. She continued to attend her engagements with an unchanging smile and her favorite pearl earrings, maintaining the illusion that nothing had disturbed the usual order of things. However, astute insiders close to the royal court observed subtle shifts, an unusual stiffness in her posture, and piercing, sometimes haunting glances she cast toward Prince William whenever they met. What is particularly striking about this period is not merely the intricacies of politics, but also the profound psychological dimensions. How does one maintain dignity and steadfastness within a system seemingly designed to outlast you? How does one continue to smile when history is silently rewriting your own chapter? By the first week of October, the atmosphere within Buckingham Palace had undergone a significant transformation. The corridors that once echoed with the gentle clinking of teacups and the measured rhythm of royal footsteps were now hushed with whispers. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones, exchanging sealed envelopes and encrypted notes, as if the palace itself had become a vast chessboard where every move could determine the monarchy's future. Tension reached its apex in the silver drawing room. It was late evening, and the lights were dimmed to ensure maximum privacy. Prince William sat at a long mahogany table, flanked by Princess Anne and his 2 most trusted advisors. Across from them sat the king's private secretary, holding a folder labeled, "The Future Role of the Queen Consort." Notably, this meeting had been convened not by the king, but by William himself, a solitary fact that spoke volumes. Princess Anne was the first to break the prolonged silence. "We cannot continue like this," she said softly. "Every event dissolves into an endless query about who appears, where, who speaks, who smiles. It's becoming utterly unsustainable." Prince William nodded, but remained silent. His gaze was fixed on the folder. He had already read every line, but seeing it again, the crisp black letters spelling his stepmother's name alongside the words, "Adjustment of Duties," made the moment acutely real. At that very hour, Camilla was at Clarence's house, seated in her private drawing room, surrounded by a small team of aides. She felt something brewing. Earlier that day, one of her most loyal staff members had been asked to provide her upcoming public itinerary for review. It was just a small detail, but in royal protocol, small details always portended larger shifts. "Why do they need to review my engagements?" she snapped. Her aide hesitated. "They said it's standard procedure, Your Majesty, to align with the prince's schedule." Camilla's lips tightened into a thin line. Alignment or elimination? Back at Buckingham Palace, the conversation grew more tense. One of the advisors proposed a gradual reduction of Camilla's public role over the next 6 months, terming it a dignified transition. Princess Anne concurred, insisting it should be framed as a necessary evolution for a modern monarchy. Prince William, however, insisted on full transparency. "It must come from me," he finally stated. "If this happens, my voice must announce it. Otherwise, it will appear as an expulsion." No one objected. In the public eye, William had become perceived as the family's moral anchor, a voice of reason after years of upheaval. But even he felt a profound unease about what he was about to undertake. He wasn't merely altering a royal title. He was effectively redrawing the very boundaries of the family. At one point, the door unexpectedly swung open. A footman entered, bowing slightly. "Your Royal Highness," he murmured. "Her Majesty requests an audience." A chill permeated the room. Camilla entered moments later, dressed in a dark green dress, her chin held high. She had no retinue, no documents, just her imperturbable composure. "I thought," she said softly, "that if we are to discuss my future, I ought to be present." The silence was almost palpable. Even Anne, who prided herself on her emotional reserve, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. William gestured to an empty chair. "Of course, Your Majesty." Camilla did not sit immediately. She cast a glance at the folder before him. "So, it's official," she said. "I'm being sidelined." William shook his head. "No one is sidelining you, Your Majesty. It's about balance, about protecting the integrity of the crown while father continues his treatment." Her tone noticeably hardened. "Integrity or image?" Anne gently interjected. "Both, Camilla, and you know it." For a brief moment, Camilla's composure faltered. "I spent 20 years earning the right to stand by him, through ridicule, through grief, through every cruel headline. And now that I have finally found peace, it is being taken from me." William's voice softened. "This isn't a punishment. This is preservation. Of you. Of him. Of all of us." Camilla sat down, her shoulders visibly heavier. "You speak exactly like her," she whispered. "Your mother." The room fell silent. William's expression barely wavered, but the remark struck him deeply. A monarchy's quiet farewell. He dedicated the remainder of the meeting to detailing the plan designed to ensure the smoothest possible transition. His voice was calm but authoritative as he outlined all the upcoming steps: coordination with press representatives, the precise timing of the public statement, and the reallocation of security responsibilities. The plan was meticulously crafted, combining precision and delicacy, yet it left no room for a reversal of the decision. "By the time this meeting concludes," Camilla rose again, "I suppose this is nothing more than grace cloaked in different words," she said, her gaze fixed on William. "If I am to step back, I will do so on my own terms." He nodded in response. "That is precisely what will be conveyed to all." Camilla left the room without another word. Only when the doors closed behind her did Anne finally allow herself to exhale. "You did the right thing," she said. "Did I?" William replied softly. "Or did I just strip her of her last corner of peace?" That night, the lights of Buckingham Palace burned long past midnight. In the East Wing, William personally drafted the announcement. Every word was carefully weighed, rewritten, and softened until the final version felt less like a stark decree and more like a farewell message. Meanwhile, at Clarence's house, Camilla poured herself a glass of white wine and sat in complete silence. The city outside was full of noise, but inside, the only sound she heard was the ticking of a clock, counting down the last moments of her public role within a fading monarchy. The next sunrise was to bring history's verdict, and her silence would speak louder than any royal decree. At precisely 9 a.m. on October 8, 2025, the gates of Buckingham Palace swung open, revealing a sea of television cameras and camera lenses. The cool autumn air was thick with palpable tension. Reporters conversed in whispers, photographers hastily adjusted their lenses, and the faint chime of Big Ben drifted through the light morning haze. The palace had announced an unscheduled address by the Prince of Wales, and that single message was enough to make all of London hold its breath in anticipation. Inside the East Wing, the atmosphere was no less electric. Staff moved with quiet but palpable urgency, their footsteps muffled on the red carpet. A lectern, adorned with the royal crest, stood at the very center of the Grand Hall, precisely where William's father had once delivered his coronation message. History seemed poised to complete a cycle. In his private antechamber, William stood before a mirror, tying his dark blue tie for the third time. His reflection appeared composed, yet the heaviness in his eyes betrayed deep exhaustion. On the table beside him lay the final draft of the Statement. A mere 185 words, each chosen with surgical precision. Catherine entered without knocking, carrying a small gold brooch that had once belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. "For strength," she whispered, pinning it to his lapel. Meanwhile, at Clarence House, Camilla sat in complete silence, intently watching the live BBC broadcast. On screen, the channel's graphics flashed, announcing, "Palace announcement imminent." Her aides paced nervously nearby, their faces pale. "They'll frame it as a transition," one murmured. "They'll make it sound gentle." But Camilla knew the true state of affairs far better. "Words can be velvet, yet cut like glass," she remarked. Precisely at 9:15 a.m., the doors swung open. William entered the hall, where the royal press corps instantly rose to attention. The chandelier lights cast a peculiar halo around him. His demeanor strangely combined youth with the weight of the burden placed upon him. He began to speak calmly, deliberately, each syllable echoing through the marble hall. "After consultation with His Majesty the King, and in full recognition of Her Majesty the Queen Consort's service to the nation, it has been decided that the Queen will transition to a private role, focusing on her charitable endeavors and personal initiatives." He paused. Absolute silence fell over the room. This decision reflects the King's desire for the monarchy to adapt with compassion, continuity, and care. The royal family expresses its profound gratitude for Her Majesty's dedication and requests privacy as these changes take effect. The entire speech lasted just over 3 minutes. But as he stepped away from the podium, it felt like the end of an era. The press erupted with questions and camera flashes the moment he left the hall. Chaos engulfed the room. Was it a resignation? Or an exile? Why was the Queen Consort absent? Within minutes, headlines flew around the world. "Camilla steps down. William reshapes monarchy. A quiet revolution at Buckingham." At Windsor Castle, King Charles sat watching the broadcast on an old television in his study. When the speech concluded, he whispered to his valet, "He did what had to be done," and closed his eyes. The valet would later tell a colleague he had never seen the king look so old, or so relieved. Camilla, however, did not wait for the numerous cameras to finish their work. She rose swiftly from her seat, the chair scraping sharply across the polished floor. "So this is what it looks like," she whispered. 40 years of painstaking history, condensed into 3 fleeting minutes. Her chief aide instinctively reached out, as if to offer comfort, but she merely waved him off with a slight motion. "No, I don't need your pity," she stated firmly. With those words, Camilla left the room, crossed the palace grounds, and entered her waiting car. Her itinerary's destination was not on the official schedule, but palace insiders later reported she drove to Windsor, bypassing Buckingham, straight to the king. What exactly transpired behind those walls remained a secret, never officially confirmed. However, one witness, a member of the household staff, described hearing muffled voices filtering through the massive oak doors. "It wasn't shouting," he recalled later. "It was something quieter, a kind of silence that cuts far deeper." By noon that day, a brief but potent follow-up statement was issued from the palace. Her Majesty the Queen Consort fully supports the King's vision for a modern monarchy and will continue her service to the nation in her personal capacity. To the general public, these words sounded polished and conciliatory, creating an impression of harmony and agreement. But those within the palace walls understood the true meaning of the message. It was an epitaph, concluding a chapter that had long been a subject of fierce debate and had now come to a painful end. That night, London was enveloped in continuous rain, the city glowing under its wet lamps. Outside the palace gates, citizens, despite the inclement weather, laid bouquets under flickering streetlights, some for the king, others for the queen, and perhaps some for the centuries-old institution itself. High in the east wing of Buckingham Palace, the Prince of Wales stood alone by a window, watching the city lights blur into hazy streaks beyond the glass. The decision had been made, and it was irreversible. The monarchy had changed forever, taking on new contours, but all he felt at that moment was a heavy, echoing, endless silence pressing down on him. By the next morning, the initial shock had transformed into a storm of emotions and discussions. Front pages of global newspapers were unanimous in their headlines, proclaiming, "Camilla steps aside, William's defining moment, monarchy rewritten in a single sentence." News anchors actively debated whether what had happened was a modernization or a quiet but resolute coup. BBC commentators called the event the softest abdication in royal history, emphasizing its unprecedented nature. Even across the Atlantic, on American television channels, news broadcasts led with the story, constantly showing footage of William's composed face and highlighting Camilla's absence from the palace. Inside Buckingham Palace, beneath a veneer of calm professionalism, chaos reigned. Advisors moved swiftly between offices, striving to strike a delicate balance between diplomatic tact and effective damage control. The palace switchboard glowed continuously with calls from ambassadors and Commonwealth representatives, all urgently seeking reassurance and clarification. The Royal Communications Team, acting under William's direct instruction, issued a second statement emphasizing the monarchy's unity, dignity, and continuity. However, the subtext of this message was unmistakable. The monarchy had been reshaped, and not everyone was ready to accept these drastic changes. At Windsor Castle, Camilla remained behind the closed doors of her apartments. Only a small group of trusted staff had access to her. Those who saw her described a woman not furious or broken, but deeply weary, a queen who seemed to have traded her public presence for complete silence. She spent the day carefully reading letters of support from her many charities, many of which pledged to maintain their loyalty regardless of her title. But when one such letter referred to her as the former queen consort, she reportedly folded it neatly and, without hesitation, tossed it into the fire. King Charles also remained in seclusion, avoiding public appearances. His health had noticeably declined since late September, and doctors now visited him daily, closely monitoring his condition. Nevertheless, those who had the opportunity to speak with him noted that he seemed surprisingly at peace. Charles accepted it, one of his aides confessed. He said it would be for the best, less spectacle, more charity. However, his serenity only deepened the sorrow of the staff who had watched him and Camilla rebuild the monarchy's image for years. Now, that long-standing partnership had quietly and inevitably come to an end. Meanwhile, Kensington Palace became the new epicenter of activity. William's office functioned like a well-oiled machine, promptly drafting press releases, coordinating public appearances, and meticulously ensuring every photograph projected an image of unity and stability. Catherine, always a symbol of composure and resilience, arranged a visit to a children's hospital for the following week, a subtle but deliberate gesture designed to soften public sentiment. Her choice of attire, a soft dark blue coat she had once worn during the Queen's Jubilee, did not go unnoticed. It was diplomacy by fabric, reassurance conveyed through color. Public opinion on the matter proved deeply polarized, dividing society into various camps. Polls conducted by YouGov showed that 65% of Britons expressed support for Prince William's decision, viewing it as a necessary and entirely appropriate step. At the same time, 25% of respondents considered the action cold and premature. On social media, fierce debates erupted. Some participants felt Camilla had been unfairly sidelined, while others saw William's action as the fulfillment of a certain destiny. On the global stage, print and news portal headlines alternated between admiration and sympathy. Le Monde, for instance, characterized the event as a lesson in quiet strength, while the New York Times called it a monarchy learning humility. Despite all this controversy, King Charles III's approval rating slightly increased, even as his public activity noticeably decreased. For many, his acceptance of this transition was perceived as a display of nobility, not weakness. "He leads by letting go," one editorial wrote, and in doing so, perhaps saved his son from inheriting chaos. Not everyone, however, found inner peace in this new interpretation of events. At Windsor, staff who had previously served Queen Camilla began, one by one, to resign. The Queen's office, once the heart of her activities, emptied with each passing hour. Late in the evening, she was repeatedly seen walking alone through the castle gardens, her coat pulled tightly around her. The air was cool, the grass slick with dew, but she moved unhurriedly, almost with a purpose, as if trying to commit every path to memory for the last time. In London, Prince William concluded his day with a phone call to his father. Their conversation was brief, its details never publicly disclosed. It is only known that King Charles III ended the call with a phrase later quoted by a palace insider. "The crown survives, but so too must compassion." And as night fell over the royal estates, the balance of power, once shared between the king and his queen, subtly shifted towards the next generation. The monarchy, battered but still breathing, once again found itself at a crossroads between centuries-old traditions and inevitable transformation. As dawn broke over London the next day, Buckingham Palace once again stood in its tranquil majesty. Its facade gleamed in the soft October light, and the flags remained still, despite the whirlwind of events that had swept through its marble corridors. Behind those magnificent walls, however, the monarchy had been irreversibly altered. The dynamic of power had shifted not through rebellion or royal decree, but through a quiet, relentless inevitability. Prince William's decision not only redefined Camilla's role, it fundamentally redrew the emotional map of the entire royal family. There were no shouts, no public spectacles, just a son bearing the burden of duty in the only way he knew how, with restraint and resolve. For him, it wasn't about titles or public approval. It was about profound responsibility, that painful responsibility that demands immense sacrifices from those who never asked to be leaders. Camilla, in her quiet seclusion at Windsor, became both a symbol of grace and tragedy. She embodied what few could truly grasp, the high cost of belonging to an institution that never truly forgives or forgets. Her silence now spoke volumes more than any official statement. It was not a defeat. It was, rather, an acknowledgement. Sometimes, stepping back is not capitulation, but an act of true strength. And perhaps, within this royal redefinition, lies a profound lesson. That even in the corridors of power, humanity must come first. That the ability to let go, be it of power or pride, can be the most courageous act of all. It reminds us that true leadership is not control. It is compassion, the wisdom to find balance, and the knowledge of when it is time to pass the torch to the next generation. As the crown prepares for its next chapter, one cannot help but wonder, will this new version of the monarchy, guided by principles of transparency and tenderness, truly withstand the tests, or will the weight of centuries-old traditions once again pull it back?